Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Jeannie. I am a 6'2" self-projected projector. I have a defined head, ajna, throat, and G-center, and they're all connected straight down the middle channels, which are all part of individual circuitry. In today's video, I was looking through the comments yesterday, and there was someone who asked if I could make a video on having individual circuitry and being a pure individual and my experiences with it. And I'm like, oh yes, that sounds like fun. And it's actually quite interesting, kind of funny, because I have this Instagram post that I've been holding off on releasing because it feels like it's a piece of content that's going to be a little bit controversial or polarizing. So I've kind of been holding back. I felt into it, I'm like, I think this is one of the pieces that I want to wait for the right timing. So I'm starting to think maybe this might be the right timing. So I am going to talk about, I feel like this is going to be a long video, so I'm already kind of like letting y'all know, go grab a snack or watch this in parts, because there is a lot that I feel like I want to say, but we'll see what comes out of my mouth. Like, we never know. I don't know. I do have some notes that I took last night because I wanted to kind of like feel into what it was that I wanted to talk about, because there's a lot. I think one of the things that I am really good at doing is letting y'all know, like in a lot of my posts, you'll see me say, like, this is what traditional human design says. However, this is how I see it. And I'm gonna talk about this piece first because the human design community, I feel like, can be quite tight-knit. Like, there's some people that have already kind of like established themselves within the community, and there's kind of like this debate or conflict that goes on where, you know, there's people who are like, you should only stick to source, and then there are other people who have like a more intuitive approach to it. They've kind of like made tweaks to the system, and the people who are more traditional, they're like, you shouldn't make tweaks, so like it's disrespectful to source or this or that. And I personally, I don't necessarily see anything wrong with either. It's just they can serve a different purpose. For me personally, I have a lot of gates in 6 lines, and the 6 lines are in that 4th quarter of mutation, so they're kind of looking for like, okay, this is kind of what it feels like to me. I've always described it like this, or I often describe it like this, is this is kind of like what's been done, but this is what works, this is what doesn't work, and this is what I see, this is what we see. Like, this is the new stuff, which can or cannot be what source says. So going back to like what I feel like I'm really good at doing is like telling y'all, okay, this is what source says, and I also kind of like, yeah, but no, and this is how I see it. So this is gonna be like my disclaimer. Like, if you're very source based, I think there's a reason behind that. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me personally, I'm going to, again, be very intentional and making it very clear, like, this is what human design says, but this is how I see it, and this is why. And we're going to talk about why that format in a little bit. But let's talk first about this concept of like pure individual. Traditionally, human design says that if all your channels are part of individual circuitry, you are a pure individual. Personally, I see it a little bit different because I'm quite sensitive to the energy, not only of the environment, but of people, and I can feel like the subtle nuances. So my thought process is, even though that's what traditionally human design says, the way it works in my mind is that channels are composed of 2 gates, right? So you need 2 gates in order to get a channel. And let's say from my chart, I have 3 channels that are all individual channels, so that would be 6 gates. But I also have more gates that are defined in my chart. And when I take a look at the overall breakdown of those gates, what type of circuitry they are, yes, my overall circuitry, genetic matrix does this for you. Like, it gives you like the percentage of your circuitry. It breaks it down for you. For me, I always forget. It's between 50 to 53, let's say 55 percent individual circuitry, and then the rest is broken down between tribal and collective. So the way I see it is that, like, individual circuitry is my leading energy. However, there are subtle nuances that are created by the other gates that are defined that may or may not be a part of individual circuitry. I think recently, because of the transits, I've had a lot more I think I've had like at least one more individual channel activated for a longer period of time. But for example, my conscious sun is in gate 41, which I just have the gate, I don't have the full channel. And gate 41 is a collective circuitry. So there's this very huge component of like wanting to share my experience, which I think is part of the reason why I love this question, because it's like I get to talk about my experience. Yes. Like, yes, I would love to do that. So this conscious sun makes up 70% of my energetic blueprint. So we've got that, which is a collective energy. And I have noticed, like, when I'm not able to share my insights or share my thoughts or share my experiences, I do start to feel, I'm going to use the word melancholy, although I don't know, it can be subtle, I guess. So it takes me sometimes a little while to identify that it is melancholy, because the way that my mind relates to melancholy is, like, for example, after my mom passed away, I experienced like this deep, profound sadness. And the melancholy that I experience when I'm not able to share, like, I don't have an audience to share my insights with, is more subtle. It's not as profound, so it's more subtle. But other ways melancholy has shown up for me is more of like, when I get like too in my head, I start thinking like, what's the point? Like, what's the point of it all? Like, what's the meaning of life? And then I have to catch myself. But this normally happens when I've been hermiting too much, when I've been isolating more than what is healthy. So this is why, for me personally, the way that I kind of prefer to look at it, instead of looking at it from like pure individual, which technically human design does classify me as a pure individual, but for me, like, that doesn't feel accurate in my mind. And this could be a defined head, defined ajna thing. In my mind, a pure individual would be someone whose total circuitry equals 100% individual circuitry. And I have yet to meet a human being who has 100%. That would mean like all your gates, and then that's like all your channels. You have all individual channels and no gates, no other gates that are, collective or tribal. That to me would be a more accurate representation of like being a pure individual. So in my mind, I'm like, yeah, that's what human design says, but I don't necessarily agree. I can understand why they say that, but again, it's like I feel the subtle nuances of the gates, not only in my experience, but from other people. There are people in the human design community who market themselves as pure individuals, but when I read their work, when I feel into them, when I watch what they're putting out there, it feels like a more tribal energy. There's some people who are very protective of source material, and from my experience of being a pure individual, you if you've watched my other content, you probably or if you follow me on Instagram, there's kind of like this energy of like, this is what human design says, but I don't care. Like, that hasn't been my experience. Like, I see it playing out this way. And for me, it's like, Ra was a human being. Like, he wasn't perfect. So, like, why are we putting him up on such a high pedestal and saying that everything he said is correct or like the ultimate truth? And like, I have a lot of questions about human design, which I haven't really had like the space to be able to like talk about them. This is why I said like this might be a long video, because there's like a lot of stuff that's been brewing and processing inside of my head. But like, for example, Ra was a manifester, and manifestors have that repelling aura, yet in many of the lectures he'll talk about like how he's, I don't know if he was like riding the subway or something, like, and he was sitting next to someone and he was taking in that person's emotions. So I'm like, wait, if Ra was a manifestor and his aura is repelling, why is he taking in other people's energy? There's got to be more to like the stuff we hear all the time. And what I kind of notice about me is that I pick up on the things that other people tend to like glaze over. And I've talked about this in my personal experience with being in line 6, and how line 6s have this like the first stage of life is like operating as a third line, where there's a lot of trial and error. And I talk about how like I never really felt the trial and error, except the only area where I did feel it more was in relationships, friendships, interpersonal dynamics. And this can be explained from like a gene key perspective. That sphere that's related to that area of my life is a pure line 3. And this is why personally I love combining human design and gene keys, because gene keys give you a more detailed breakdown of your energetic imprint. From a human design perspective, I feel like they focus more on like the profiles, the 6-2, and there isn't much deviation from that. But from the gene key perspective, every sphere has a different line. And depending on the line, there are some similarities to human design, but like if you don't want to explore the entire gene key system, because it can be very, like, it can take quite a long time, and it's not a process that's meant to be rushed. Even if you just start looking at the lines many times are so spot on that they give you so many insights into like why you operate the way you do, or why you feel the way you do. So let me go back. Let me remember what I was talking about. Okay, I think I was talking about line 3 behavior, not showing up so much as trial and error, but showing up more as like knowing what works and what doesn't work without necessarily having to try it out. And this makes sense because my individual channels are all part of the knowing circuit, and one of the characteristics of the circuit is that you don't know how you know, you just know. For me, I feel like the channel of structuring, having defined head, defined ajna, I've been able to kind of like narrow down the things to try out, the things that will have less or will take less time, energy, and money. So the trial and error is really, really minimized. Or if there is a trial and error, like I adapt very quickly. That hasn't been the case recently. I feel like recently there's been more trial and error, but I also have been spending way much more time alone. And I'm starting to realize that I need to open up to more people. I need to open up to more people, and that's something that I am working through. Like, if you feel like that's something you'd like to hear more about, let me know. Overcoming, it's not even about overcoming, it's about like working through your fear of people, social interactions, the energy involved, not just with people, but in environments and things like that. Which I feel like I'm being called to like really explore that, and it's requiring me to come out of my comfort zone and like reintegrate myself with the community, which I have been resisting for the longest time. And I was experiencing like this neck pain for the longest time. I couldn't get to the root of it, and then just this week I realized that the word that I was using a lot was connection. So it's like, oh, I've really been limiting how I've been connecting with people because I haven't wanted to deal with it. I haven't had to deal with like the misunderstandings and things like that, which are very common themes of having individual circuitry. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So once I realized, okay, what your body is asking for is for you to connect with more people. So how can I start creating gradual safety, feeling safe around being with people so that, you know, you get that message that your body's trying to tell you and you don't experience this neck pain that was like, it was not fun. Okay, so let me go back a little bit to make sure I tie off this idea. I don't quite remember if I did or if I didn't. But for me, there's a difference between, or the term I prefer to use is, instead of pure individual, the term that feels more correct for me is whether or not a person who has a lot of individual circuitry is being a true individual. And for me personally, one of the biggest gifts, which can also be a challenge because it can involve like working through the fear of rejection, the fear of being misunderstood, mainly the fear of being rejected, shunned, cast aside, is this concept of like being a true individual. For me means standing up for your truth, which your truth is going to be very specific to the individual. It's a very individual experience. It's a very unique experience. I think within individuals, like, there are common themes, but also every individual has their own truth. And also I feel like even people who have tribal circuitry or collective circuitry, more of that than individual circuitry, they're still individuals, but they might not be tapped into that energy as much as we as individuals are. And the way I like to see it is like, okay, human design kind of, it's not only about learning to live and operate from your design, but the way I like to see it is like, okay, this person who's tribal, what can I learn from them and how they operate as a tribal person, you know, so that could help me be able to integrate myself a little bit easier into the tribe, into the collective. It kind of like facilitates the process, where like people who are too collective or too tribal, what I would see them kind of like encourage them to explore is like their individuality, helping them tap into that individuality and how to express their individuality. Because the kind of like the visual that pops into mind is like the tribal and the collective are very into like trends and fads. Or I think of like reels, you know, all of a sudden there's a song that starts trending, or like, for example, the Wednesday Addams dance, and then all of a sudden everybody's copying that, you know. And in a way, like, I think Wednesday is like very individual, she's very unique, and then the collective's like, whoa, look at her, and then they want to go, and then like there's okay, the channel is structuring what I feel like the collective and tribe can do is like copy exactly what Wednesday Addams, like her dance, or the actress, I forget her name, and then what the individual would do is not only it creates that, but the individual isn't flattered by the direct or like a copycat version of what they're doing. What we really like to see is like, okay, yeah, take what I do, but make it your own. how can you make it your own, and how can you tweak it? How can you change it? Like, by all means, change it. Like, don't do it exactly like the way I do it. If it inspired you, great, but how can you make it your own? How can you express yourself in your own unique way? And I think that's a very, very beautiful gift individuals have, of encouraging others to be themselves, be an individual, even if they are like more tribal or more collective, because I don't know, in my head it works like, yeah, we're all individuals. Even if you've got more tribal or more collective circuitry, you're still an individual, but maybe you're not tapped into that as much as like the tribal and collective stuff because of the breakdown of your circuitry. Doesn't mean that you can't, and it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to operate as an individual. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, like, we can all learn from each other, and I think that is something that we kind of lose sight, or I feel like the community loses sight of, and how, you know, how they say, like, in your undefined centers, that's where you're here to learn and gain wisdom. I feel like that concept could be applied in other ways, not just with undefined centers. Maybe it's easier to do it there, but with undefined centers, because like the way I see it, and I feel like not a lot of people talk about, is not necessarily whether something's defined or undefined. The better question, like, is it in alignment? Because you can have something undefined and not be in alignment, and you can have something defined and not be in alignment. Like, the better question for me is, like, are you in alignment, regardless of like what your design is, and what does alignment look like for you? What does it feel like for you? Very individual, at a very individual level. So I think, did I cover everything? Okay, so essentially that was a very long way of saying, for me, it's more of seeing it from, instead of pure individual, does this person feel like a true individual? Like, are they, because I don't know, like, for me, I don't have it in me to completely accept everything that source says. Like, if we're talking about human design, and I do this in other areas as well, where I don't have it in me to say, you know, I completely agree with this. The line 3 also shows up for me a lot in finding the loophole, finding the caveat, finding the yeah, but. I feel like that's a very strong energy within me, which can create a lot of bitterness, and I'm learning to use strategy and authority in that department, just so that I don't put myself in my not self theme. So that's kind of like the way I see it. More of like, if this person is marketing themselves, or if they're like, their chart indicates that they are a pure individual, are they a true individual? And are there other subtle energies, whether tribal or collective, that are playing out in this person's design? And I say that again because what I've already shared, where the 41 for me is a collective. It's got collective energy, and I have felt like, where if I don't have someone to share things with, I can feel that melancholy. So, okay, that's how we're starting off. Let's keep going. Okay, like I've already mentioned, I have all my individual circuitry is part of the knowing circuit. And this circuit it's responsible for our direction as a species. So again, it's bringing the unknown into the known, but we don't really have proof of what we're thinking, if it actually works, because it's never been done. And in the material that I've read, it mentions how there could be a danger to, like, bringing in mutations without first exploring whether or not they will hold. And then it mentions this example of like frogs, for example, coming in with like 4 legs or 6 legs, and then if there's no control over whether or not that mutation stays, like it can cause a lot of problems and be dangerous. I want to say I don't necessarily agree with that. It could be that there are other factors in my chart where I feel like most of the change that I've contemplated about like sharing and bringing out, I don't see it causing harm. I really do see it like helping. So as individuals, it's kind of like this, again, bringing change into the world, and because it's change, it's different. The collective and the tribe normally resist change. They require proof before things are even tried out. So for me personally, what I've done is learn to surrender, which is not my favorite thing. I'm still learning to embrace that. Learn to trust the timing, which is also not my favorite thing to do, but I am starting to recognize how helpful it can be to wait for the invitation, or wait for an opening, even if it's small, to be able to kind of like plant the seed and give it time to grow. Another thing that I have done in the past is like, if people aren't hearing me, I will just start implementing things on my own. I'm a 6'2" role model. I will do my own thing, and I will hold the energy of like, this works. I know it works, and I know it's helpful. And it's not that I'm doing the thing on my own because I'm wanting to prove it to anybody else. It's because I really see the benefit of the idea, or what I want to create, like how it's going to positively impact other people. So it's like I do my own thing, and then another really good characteristic of individual circuitry is that you naturally draw a lot of attention, which before I didn't see it as a good thing. This will require you to get really comfortable with being seen. I think this is something that projectors can have a lot of wounds and traumatic experiences around being seen, because for me in the past, being seen equaled being misunderstood, being rejected, being set aside, because like she's too weird, or we don't get her, or a lot of resentment on my part because like they don't get me, they don't see it, they're not listening, they don't hear me, all these things, which was perpetuating more of that. I was experiencing more of that because that's where my energy was, like they don't get it, they don't get it, they don't get it. And now learning from that, it's more of like, they might not get it right now, but they're going to. And all I have to do is like keep going, and it does require like a lot of courage and boldness, and like really, but it doesn't feel like, to me it's never felt like, let me show them. It's felt more like, I believe so much in this nugget, this little gold nugget. It's like so precious and so beautiful, and it can impact so many lives. I believe in this so much, even if nobody does. Like, I don't care. Like, I don't care if y'all don't see what I see, or if y'all don't get it. It's going to take time. I realize that. But as an individual, that's my gift. Like, I stand behind it. And earlier I was talking about like explaining why. I have gate 61, and gate 61 has a lot of like this asking why. But one of the things that they do encourage you to do if you have individual circuitry is to explain your thought process, because this minimizes the risk of being misunderstood. And from my experience in explaining my thought process, many times the majority of the people that I am able to hold their attention, the majority of them will not get it. However, what I have noticed is that there's usually like one or two people, depending on the size of the group, of course, there is a very, very, very small percentage of people who do get it. And they might or might not say something. And then there's other people who might say, you know what, I don't agree with you because of this, this, or that, but I really admire the way you presented the information or the way you stood behind it. And to me, it's kind of like I planted a seed, and they might not get it, but it's like I planted the seed, and I trust that that's going to sprout when the time is right. And I have no control over that. But my intention, my purpose is to plant the seed, and I trust that that seed is going to sprout at the perfect moment, and that person's going to remember, whether they remember necessarily or not that it came from me or they heard it from me. Many times they do remember it came from me, because as individuals we have this, like, we stand out, we're very memorable. Whether it's a good thing or like in a good way or a bad way, that just depends on how we operate, or like not even how we operate, just there's this I'm trying to remember what it said. Okay, I couldn't find the quote, but there was this house I went to once, and they had this like doll looking thing. It was a piece of art, but it looked like a doll. Not like a porcelain doll or anything like that. It was a very quirky looking thing, and it had a quote like on her belly, and that said something along the lines like she decided that if she couldn't be beautiful, she would at least be memorable. And it was like this maybe kind of like a paper mache type of thing, and it was like very colorful. The doll like wasn't very pretty, but she was memorable. Like, I think about her all the time. I've contemplated that quote, but it kind of like made me think of like this individual component where you stand out. The information says it could be like by the way you dress. Many times individuals have a very unique way of dressing, but it's not just that. There's something about our energy that kind of like sends out the signal of like, this person is unique. So it's kind of like you're sending out this signal of uniqueness, and the gift, the beauty of that is that we empower others to also be unique, to be themselves. And this is a very big keynote of individual circuitry empowerment, and this is something that I've had to learn, because before, what I would find is that people, mainly friends, girlfriends, would get really triggered about the way I dress. They assumed that I dressed that way in order to draw attention from the opposite sex. And that wasn't my intention. Like, I dressed that way because it was what I liked. And I'm talking about like sequins, tulle, high heels, very... yeah, like I've worn outfits that probably a lot of people would think they couldn't pull off. Like, I didn't really think about it. It was just what I liked. So I wore it. This concept of not caring. So this caused like me feeling rejected or not accepted, and I didn't know how to use, like, let's say the way I dress, if it was triggering something in a friend, saying, well, that's just letting you know that part of you wants to express yourself through fashion, and maybe how can you allow yourself, give yourself more permission to wear things that maybe you think you can't get away with, or that don't look good on you, or are too much, I always get this visual, like, I love to do grocery shopping, and I also really love dresses. Ever since I was a little girl, like, ballerinas, like the tutus, they were always like, I was obsessed with them. But also dresses. I love to wear dresses a lot. So I like to do my own grocery shopping, and I kind of like something that I say a lot is like I would totally be okay with wearing like a full ball gown and go grocery shopping just to go grocery shopping. I don't see how, where maybe the tribe and the collective are like, no, 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 you only wear ball gowns to balls or parties or weddings. Like, you don't wear ball gowns to go grocery shopping. And I'm more thinking of it like, it's a beautiful dress. Like, I want to wear a beautiful dress. I don't care if I'm just going out to check the mail or going grocery shopping. Like, I want to experience wearing the dress because it's pretty. The information mentions that knowing demands an audience in order for the mutation to bring change to the world. And this is something I'm leaning more into because being aligned to, I am learning to put myself more in social situations and seeing them more like it's uncomfortable because you're not used to it. And the more we normalize this, like the bigger your window of tolerance is going to get. And it's kind of like, even though you do like to hermit and it is important for you to hermit, you've been hermiting way too much. And I can feel it because the mental pressure has been really intense. The thought loops have been really intense. So I'm starting to see like I need to interact with people, and I had been resisting that for a very long time. Another huge component of this is getting comfortable with using my voice, which as a self-projected projector is very important. I think for anyone it's important to be able to learn and be comfortable with using your voice, but especially for self-projected projectors. I feel like throughout my childhood, pretty much my entire life, I've repressed a lot of the things that I wanted to say. The channel of structuring has this quality of blurting things out, which can get you in trouble in social situations. Sometimes the example that's given is like if someone gets a bad haircut, maybe tribal and collective people are more like of not saying, not telling the person it's a bad haircut, being supportive. But the individual, it's like you can't lie. Your truth comes out. So it's about learning. I feel like I've gotten better at pausing. And there are some times where stuff just comes out. However, I've learned to tweak the energy of, okay, whatever comes out. Like in the past, it's been kind of like throwing darts at a person. It's sharp. It hurts. So now I embody more the energy. Like if I do blurt something out, having it be more in the energy of being playful or like funny. And not that before I had the intention to hurt someone, but I feel like as a projector, sometimes like we can be very intense, and it's been about learning to play with my energy and have it feel lighter. Just because as a projector I can be intense doesn't mean I have to be intense all the time. I can learn to master my energy so that things are still the truth, but they don't feel like I'm poking people. No. So yeah, learning to get comfortable with using my voice. Another thing that kind of like I realized this week was how, because my past experience has been like I've been marginalized, set aside, it's created beliefs and feelings of like I don't belong. I feel like I don't belong anywhere. And I've been doing this course, and a huge component of the course is having mentoring sessions. We have small groups, and what I noticed, what I was able to create more awareness around this is like, it was a very small call this week. There were I think 5 people in there, me included. And towards the end, the mentor was like, Jeannie, you've been really quiet, and I totally don't want to pressure you. if you don't want to say anything. I know you're just observing and you're absorbing. And I was able to open up a little bit more towards the end. But after the call, I started thinking about their words, and I started thinking, kind of got this visual of like, I'm in the group, but energetically, it's like I'm marginalizing myself, because that's been my experience where I've wanted to be in the group. I've wanted to experience connection, but because of the channel of structuring, or because of so much individual circuitry, and having to learn social cues that are naturally programmed or ingrained in other people, they haven't been programmed or ingrained in me or activated within my genetic sequence because of the individual circuitry. Before, it caused a lot of rejection and feeling misunderstood, and not that I intentionally meant to hurt people. And again, I've also learned to not take all the responsibility. Other people have their own trauma and their own stuff that they're working through, but before, I didn't know that. So what I realized this week in that call is that I was like, yeah, I'm in the group, but I'm not using my voice to connect with people. I'm withholding my voice, and I'm in the group, but I'm also marginalizing myself by holding back or not giving myself permission to talk. So this is something that because again, it's just been recent awareness, I'm looking at ways of or seeing the patterns of how I do this, where yeah, I'm in the group, but I also feel like I'm not welcomed, or I'm not wanted there, or that I don't belong, and playing with this concept of perception. My past experiences caused trauma, social trauma, which caused me to create these perceptions of whenever you're in a group, you don't really belong there. And now it's switching over to okay, that's what it was like before, but it doesn't have to be like that anymore. What do you always say, Janie? You just have to know something's a thing so that you know what to do about it. So now, think of all the gifts that individual circuitry gives you. You're here to mutate. And many times, this mutation, y'all, how can I explain this? I think this is one of my favorite aspects of my chart, this quality of mutation. And the mutation isn't caused by imposing what I have to say, or my beliefs or thoughts or insights on anybody. That's not how I feel like it's played out in me. I feel like the mutation occurs in other people at a cellular level. Many of them, if they have the awareness, they feel it. Others, it's at a very subconscious level where they might not realize it. They kind of feel it, but they may not have awareness around it. But it's just by being yourself in a true individual way, true, not pure, because you can be an individual, but if you're holding yourself back, you're not really living up to your full potential as a pure individual. So this is why, for me, the word true helps me create more awareness. Am I being a true individual? Am I really embodying this energy of being myself? And it's by being myself, I've noticed that people start making comments of I had someone recently where we kind of been going back and forth for a very long time, where they don't see what I'm saying, created a lot of bitterness, and then it took me a while to realize there was no invitation. So the moment I backed off, something shifted. And it's all the things that I had said before kind of landed, because there was no longer that pressure that I was creating at a unconscious level. And one of the things they said recently is I want to thank you for being so kind and so patient and this and that. And then it was but mainly just for being yourself. And I've kind of been sitting with that for a little bit, because I'm wait, how do I feeling into that? How does this make me feel, like allowing myself to feel good about that. And that's the thing about the individual, just by being yourself, being true to your truth, and tweaking the energy, kind of like learning to forgive, clear the past, and say, okay, clean slate, how can I use this individual circuitry and really leverage it? Not only so that it benefits me and I don't feel like I don't belong, I don't feel like I'm rejected, but because I see like my individual circuitry is the thing that propels humanity forward. It's important. Like, I matter. I'm important. And not in an ego way, but it's like I do belong. And it's more of like, before, the belief I formed was like, they don't want me. Well, that's fine. It's not like I need them anyway. You know, this lack of caring. So the lack of caring can work against you. It's just like you have to learn when to activate like the lack of caring. And for me, it's like it's going to serve you better when like you're able to activate the not caring when it's something that like an insight, an insight, a mutation or something that you see benefits the tribe and the collective, like standing behind that. And then not using it the way I had been using, like, well, they don't want me, it's not like even like I don't care, I don't want them anyways. And more now it's shifting into, in the past, like I've closed myself off to people because of these wounds, this trauma, and now it's like they do need me. They do want me. They may not know that they want me, but it's also like changing my perception, right? Because the past experiences created this filter in my brain that's causing me to perceive that people don't want to be around me. But when I stop myself and I'm like, wait, is that really true? Like, when you do go into these group situations, like, how do people greet you? And it's like, people are happy to see me. Like, I recently started going back to church, and I had resisted going back, mainly because the grief and things like that. But I kind of finally got the note, the memo that I'm supposed to go back. And right now, this is like the community that I have available to me, right? So I went back, and I'm gradually like integrating myself into the community again, and knowing my nervous system, knowing where I'm at right now. I'm also doing this somatic practice to help regulate my nervous system, and I have been feeling a lot more grounded. But I kind of like planned it. I'm like, okay, this is good. It feels like it's going to be a lot, but I really don't know. And I have more tools than I had before. But I have to be open to like opening up to people, because my mental health needs it. Like, you got to stop lying to yourself, you know? You need to be around people. You can't be isolating this. I mean, you can't, but you see what it's doing to your health. So we're going to start reintegrating, and we're gonna do it slow. So it's kind of like in my head, like I have a plan. Like I went and I sat in the very back, and I just let whoever wanted to come. I kind of set an intention of like, God, please have the people that I'm ready to receive that, because like it felt uncomfortable, but it also felt really good. And it's more learning to shift my perception, shift my focus into it feeling really good. Because what I did in the past, and I'm kind of going to introduce the concept of fractals here. This is why I said this is going to be a really long video, because there's so many layers to it. But before I knew fractals were a thing, what I was doing is I was focusing on the people that were rejecting me. People-pleasing tendencies, right? Like, I have to get them to see that I am worthy, or that I am. That's like wanting to prove myself in order to gain their acceptance and like be accepted into that specific group. What I'm seeing now is that all that time that I thought that nobody wanted me, it was really that I was focusing on the people that didn't want me, but there was this other group that did want me. They did accept me, they did love me, they wanted to hear more, they loved being with me, but it's like I didn't want them. I wanted the people that rejected me. So it's been this journey of like, building my self-esteem, cultivating love for myself, respect for myself, and seeing, okay, it's a question of fractals. Like if this fractal, because like, a fractal can either drain your resources or they can help you. So for pretty much the majority of my life, I was focusing on the wrong fractal, a fractal that wasn't serving me. So now it's like whenever I see or start to sense a little bit of rejection, or another thing, which can depend on your several factors to your chart. Again, this is very particular to me. There might be a lot of things that you resonate with, but as a line 2, there is this concept of the projection field. So many times I was experiencing people projecting onto me, which also didn't help. Like I amplified that because I had a lot of like perfectionist tendencies. So, working on clearing those, a lot of control issues, wanting to control how people perceived me. So this was amplifying the effects of the projection field, and mostly from women, which kind of relates to like a sister wound. I feel like from women I experienced like more rejection, and from men it worked a little bit differently. It was more like they saw me, they liked me, I felt like they didn't really know a lot about me, and it's like they wanted to start relationships with me, and then when I said, you know what, I'm not interested, that's when they would turn against me. And it's kind of like they took me off the pedestal and lit a match, like that, a line 5 energy of feeling like you're being burned at the stake. So I went from like a very high, people seeing me in a very high regard, but it was a projection field, like it wasn't the truth, to like, being trampled on. So now I'm learning to shift, like whenever I catch myself, wait, is this your fractal? Like, is this, it could be your fractal, but is this a fractal that's serving you? And if it's not, let's close that off. Say, okay, thank you for the lessons. Thank you for reminding me. Thank you for helping me embody this lesson at a deeper level. Bless you. Goodbye. And then this creates space for a higher frequency fractal to come in, and this is a fractal that's going to help you move in a more positive way. I don't like to think of it linear, I like to think of it as a spiral, towards where you're supposed to be, like a healthier purpose, a healthier trajectory. And I'm going to just go ahead and insert this. I'm not sure if that's exactly how like traditional human design explains it. This is like my experience, how I've observed it works with me. So just keep that in mind in case you're like, well, that's not what human design says. You're probably right. This is, again, just based on my experience and how things have felt to me. So yeah, all that to say, getting comfortable with using my voice, focusing, changing my perception, asking myself, is it really true that people don't want to be around you? Or are you just perceiving that they don't want to be around you? Or are you assuming? And can we start releasing our grip on that filter? Like if you not quite at the place where you could just like completely switch out for a better filter, can you start loosening your grip on the story that you keep telling yourself that people don't want to be around you? And can you allow yourself to receive that love and hold it? Because another thing that I was noticing is that like I was receiving it, but I couldn't hold it for very long because it felt uncomfortable. It kind of didn't feel good, or I wasn't allowing myself for it to feel good. So it's like now learning to hold it. And this could, like, the practical way is like when somebody hugs me. Before, it used to be like, okay, let's hug and let's get this over with. And now it's been more like, okay, I'm being hugged. How do I feel about this? And it feels a little weird, but it also kind of feels like really good. Can I allow myself for it to feel really good? Can I feel this person like hugging me tight, and like this means that they like me, that they love me, that they care about me. This is a really good thing, brain. Like, we're starting to normalize this. And what this helps me create is a better experience of not feeling rejected. Kind of like healing that inner wound so that my external world mirrors like more acceptance. And again, like the more I accept myself, the more I accept my like who I am, the more people are going to accept it. And this doesn't mean that everybody's gonna like us, no. But you get better at managing or dealing with rejection. And I think before I had this notion of like, oh, if people reject me, I'm gonna die, which can be a very like ancestral thing. So I would also explore like the ancestral components, because for me those have been like a really, really big thing. Okay, another characteristics of individuals is that they don't like to be influenced or told what to do. This is very true for me, but I feel like it's played out differently. For example, I was always very obedient to my parents because church and God and defined head, defined ajna. A lot of like the ideas, beliefs I formed were coming from me, or what I observed or what I read or what I studied. I made my own conclusions. I would be like, oh, this plus that and a little bit of that equals this. It means that this and that. Wasn't so much of like what other people were telling me, which I feel could be more of a thing if you have an undefined head, undefined ajna. For me, I was drawing all these conclusions and I was just assuming that this is how it worked for everybody. So I feel like there's a difference. I tend to, what's the word? I tend to have more of like and this is very recent, because for most of my childhood, teenage years, young adult life, like I was not rebellious at all. Like I don't even think I had a rebellious face. I think like now I'm being a little bit more rebellious, but it's when the underlying energy feels like the person wants to control me. If I feel the tiniest bit of controlling energy, that's where I'm like, I don't like being told what to do. But if the energy beneath that feels like guidance, it feels loving, I feel like it's easier for me to accept that. But I also have the incarnation cross of the alpha, which I'm starting to see a lot more now, like wanting to break out of systems or things that control me or that feel restrictive, which is very new to me. Like I'm kind of like learning to navigate that. Okay, another thing that people with individual circuitry experience is this concept of being inherently deaf. Okay, with this concept of deafness, or this characteristic of deafness, the purpose behind us like tuning out information is to preserve our inner truth. And this can be one of the things that can cause a lot of issues within relationships or friendships. Personally, if you watch my content, I know I've said this earlier, I have this saying, like, I just have to know something's a thing so that I know what to do about it. Just because this circuitry has this component of like deafness, it's creating awareness around this. And in my other videos where I talk about my channels, I do talk about this, but I'll mention it briefly here. The way I've navigated this is, one, creating awareness around it. Two, because the way it works in my head is like the person will start saying something, and then like they'll say something that'll catch my attention or curiosity, and then defined head, defined ajna will start forming, you know, its own ideas, beliefs, or thoughts around that subject, and it's like I'll follow that down the rabbit hole and kind of like forget not that I forget the person's talking, but like I tune them out because I'm like following my thoughts instead of what they're saying. So now what I do is like whenever I'm talking to someone, I'm like, okay, remember, you have this deafness component. Let's pay as much attention as we possibly can because it is a practice learning to like tune in, not tune out. But another thing I do is like in my head as they are talking, I repeat everything that they're saying in my head, and I'm usually pretty good. Sometimes like they'll lose me towards the end, and then I'll practice vulnerability, saying, you know what, I'm like, if it's my brother, I will tell him, you know what, I tuned out a little bit and this is the last thing I heard. Could you repeat the last part? And then many times it's like I'm hearing it, but I'm not paying too much attention. So then he'll just say a word or two. I'm like, okay, yeah, now I understand what you were trying to say. There's that. Another thing that they recommend is touch. So let's say if I were in a relationship and we were needing to have this conversation, like a more important conversation, I would ask the person to kind of keep some sort of physical contact, and not just like holding my hand, but kind of like incorporating a little bit of movement to it, or like a hand on my knee like constantly, or like every so often kind of like squeezing the knees so that I can stay in the present moment and not follow my thoughts as easily. Being intentional, those are just some tips that personally I do. Another thing that is here that I've kind of already talked about is we can feel like outsiders in the world. There can be this feeling of like being concerned about not fitting in, combined with a lack of caring. So it's kind of like this blend of, I don't understand why I don't fit in. I don't understand like why I have such a hard time being in groups or things like that. And then kind of like, well, I don't really care. But that I don't really care can be kind of like a facade because it does hurt. And I think it's more of like a defense mechanism. Like, we don't want to care, but we really do care. And just knowing that just because you feel that way, if we can update the filters, if we can update our perception, and we can update the fractals, like ask ourselves, like, what's my fractal like? What's it feel like? Do I feel recognized? And if I don't, is this a fractal that like I need to have a conversation with, or do I need to let go and allow space for a higher frequency fractal? So you can feel lost, you can feel lonely, and for me, I feel like this has come in seasons, where I feel like there's kind of like a build up that leads me to kind of like it could be a buildup of experiences or perceptions or whatnot, and then kind of like an emotional wave, but more with experiences, and then it kind of like reaches a point where like I've had enough, or maybe more so in the past because I didn't know how to process that rejection. So now that I know and I have more tools, it's like I don't let that rejection build up or those feelings of resentment build up. I ask myself, okay, if you're feeling resentful, is there an invitation? Has the invitation been revoked? Has it been tweaked? Are you giving more than what you're receiving? And are you really okay with that? Being honest with myself, and not allowing things to build up as much as I used to in the past. This is a practice. Don't think I do this perfectly. I'm recently like processing this huge amount of resentment that I was just so in the thick of it that I couldn't see it. Like, I knew it was resentment, but I was kind of like falling into this victim mentality, and like ego really got in the way, and I wasn't seeing it that way. So it's a practice, okay? I think this is already at an hour long, so I'm thinking, let me see because I do have a few more notes. Okay, no, I think I can finish this, and then maybe I'll do a part 2 if you guys want to hear more. maybe I'll do a part 2. Okay, one of the things that I wrote down in my notes is that as an individual, life is unpredictable. It can be marked by alternating order and chaos of times when you know and times when you don't know. And again, this is specific to the knowing circuit. I feel like this characteristic I didn't feel it as much prior, like before Mom passed away, because Mom was my person and my radiant sphere. From a Gene Keys perspective, I'm aligned to, which has to do with marriage, like merging my energy, working with like someone in particular or specific cause or specific purpose. After Mom passed away, I felt like I really lost that, and there was a lot more turbulence. There was a lot more chaos, but I also didn't have a safe sounding board, that I could take up as much space, and they had time to hear me out. So now it's been more of experiencing not knowing, where before Mom passed away, like my life felt very stable, very predictable, very comfortable. There weren't a lot of unknowns. When the unknowns entered the scene, that's where I started feeling more chaos. And because I've been isolating, the chaos has been amplified because I'm not having a lot of connection with other people. Okay, so there's that. Another thing that mentions about individuals is that we're the agents of the creative process, and then we need to have a very deep acceptance of our nature to be comfortable in the world. And I kind of already talked about this. It's like doing the inner work to be really, really comfortable with being different, with being seen, with feeling safe around people, and really, really accepting our nature. The more we accept our nature, who we are, the more comfortable we're going to be in the world, because we're not waiting for other people to help us feel comfortable. And with this, I don't want to say that people can't help us feel comfortable, but it's always an internal job first. Because then if we're just waiting like on external validation, that can really mess with our heads and our emotions and things like that. So it's like the more we accept our nature, that yeah, I'm different, and different doesn't have to be a bad thing. Different means, you know, how does me being different help the collective, and how can I, you know, use or see the gifts more than kind of like, because we always have two options. We can focus on what's not working, or we can focus on what is working, and what we focus on is what we amplify more. Okay, so I'm gonna pause there on that for now, because I feel like my voice is starting to like signal for me to wrap it up. Okay, I've already talked about the fractal, but let me insert this here. The information says that individuals kind of like need someone from the tribe in order for their ideas to be introduced, because the tribe is kind of like already in the group. So the individual's ideas have a higher probability of being accepted from someone who's got like more tribal circuitry versus the individual. So the way it's played out in my mind, and I kind of lived this in my relationship with my mom, where like I would see things, I would talk it out with her, but she would be kind of like my bridge to the tribe or to like people. And because she had like more social skills, the way she introduced things was different from mine. Mine was more direct, more like bam bam bam, and hers was like more subtle type of energy. Like if you're a people person, you probably understand that. So from like, let's say a human design community perspective, I'm like, if we know that individuals have these ideas that are going to move humanity forward, why don't we make it easier for them? Like, yeah, there's this concept of like timing and this and that, but you just have to know that's the thing so that you know what to do about it. And I just think of like how many shifts could humanity experience if the tribe and the collective got smarter about how they interact with the individual and how much space they allow the individual, how many invitations they send out to the individual for the individual to say, okay, this is what I'm seeing and this is how I see we can better our experience. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like learning to form allies and using your allies to help you be able to communicate and, you know, start inserting what you see into the tribe and the collective quicker than just allowing the process to naturally unfold, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. And it's not about controlling, it's just like not, I always think of it like a two-way street. Like, it's the individual, but also how can the tribe and the collective help the individual integrate into the tribe and the collective, like not make it so hard on them. You just have to know, okay, maybe we're experiencing resistance towards the individual because we don't like change, but is there something to what they're seeing that we don't quite see yet? And it just takes awareness and communication. So that's how I see it. I know some people might not see it that way, but we can talk about that more if you guys feel like you want more. Okay, I'm gonna pause here for now because I really need to eat. And then I'll decide whether or not I continue or I just do part 2 to this, because there is a lot more I want to cover. I mean, it doesn't feel like a lot more, but I feel like a lot more wants to come through. So I'm gonna pause here for now. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, there's probably going to be a part 2, so subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out. You can find me on Instagram. My handle is @JeannieSalcedo, and on my website you can find more ways of working with me. If there are any insights, any comments, anything you found useful and you want to comment down below, it always feels good to receive recognition that way. If there are any requests, things that you'd like me to talk about, also feel free to comment that down below, and I will feel into it. And yeah. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.